Well, what an occasion. We have with us Marvin Kalb. There's only one such person in the world. This is an amazing opportunity, Marvin. I always put a time marker. Today is October 16th, 2025. This is our group looking at international crisis management. How does one function when faced with a crisis? We have no absolute answers, but we indicate ways of thinking. Um, as I mentioned before we recorded, I was raised on you. You didn't know me, but I knew you. And Americans of the period when you were most active in the mid and second half of the 20th century, we always looked to you and a few others. Edward R. Murrow, I know you were very close to him. Um, I could name others. We looked to you for the truth. We looked to you for giving us information about really what was happening. Obviously, we're in a different situation now. I want to introduce to you, Marvin, a new group called Delphi Global Research Center. This is a baby in a crib. This is a new NGO, think tank, whatever. It's very small, it's very poor, and it has a stated mission objective, which is we stand with Ukraine. You won't find many think tanks these days that actually say that. They're afraid of the tax consequences, but I'm very proud to be associated with Delphi Global Research Group Center, whose mission is we stand with Ukraine. Now, Marvin, I can mention I did mention some topics. You have suggested a, um, a basic outline of what we'll talk about today. We are all concerned about the state of the United States right now. We're very concerned about what Ukraine is enduring and amazingly carrying on. We don't know the future of the only thing we know about the future is that there will be one. That's all we know. You suggested a moment ago, and I have other questions, that you might start with the situation in the United States. We were talking earlier about this rather astonishing thing that happened yesterday. The Secretary of Defense had said to his press corps, "You may only publish what I say you may publish," which is totally contrary to what journalists do. And amazingly, yesterday, they all walked out, except for one minor television network I had never heard of. Even Fox News, where the Secretary of Defense used to be employed, they also walked out. Can you take us from there, Marvin, and what does this tell us? Can we take hope from what happened yesterday at the Pentagon?
Well, Dan, thank you very much for inviting me to speak once again to your group. It's a great pleasure for me.
Thank you.
Um, to start with the obvious, we are all living through a very revolutionary, tumultuous time. From one day to the next, Dan picks up a copy of the Washington Post. Take a look at this. The lead story is Trump ordered to pause firing. He's been firing thousands of people in the US government. Hamas reasserts control in Gaza. That throws me because I thought 3, 4 days ago was just the opposite. Then Trump authorizes covert CIA action in Venezuela. That's another action. And you sit back and you ask yourself, what the heck is going on in America? Because if we can figure out what is going on in America, that will be a big step toward understanding a lot about what is going on in different parts of the world. And today what I'd like to do is to talk about three things and then take your questions. And I'll try not to be too long-winded. The 3 points are: one, what is going on in the United States, effect on the rest of the world; two specific parts, the Gaza war and then the Ukraine war. I hope to be spending a good bit of time on Ukraine because I think, as you all know, tomorrow to Washington will arrive the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, and he is here on a very important mission. All of them are, but this one is to try to move President Trump off dead center and in the direction of resupplying Ukraine with significant military hardware. Let me start with that large question about what is going on in the US. I am an old man. I've been around here for a long time. And I started way, way back as a journalist at the time that President Eisenhower was in office. That's in the mid 1950s. From that period on until Donald Trump came into the White House, I was always under the impression, with great pleasure, that I was living in a democracy,
Mhm.
in a democracy which has had many ups and downs. We are now 250 years old. That's old for many countries, but new for many others. And in that period of time, we've had major internal problems. The Civil War, for example, in the middle of the 19th century. The period immediately after World War I, when there was a crackdown similar to what ICE is doing in different American cities today. And yet, we all managed to.
Um, Marvin, there was noise and I had to mute people. Can you unmute yourself? Sorry, I had to mute everybody because there was feedback. Um, let me see.
Okay.
Okay, good, good. Yeah.
Can I make
Yeah.
an assumption that I've been heard up to this point?
Yes, absolutely. We lost 5 seconds.
Okay. Just to pick that up, I'd always been under the assumption that we could somehow return to our basic democratic roots. I even felt that during the time that Trump was in office the first time. He was making determined efforts to get his way, but he was surrounded by what we called humorously grown-ups who would stop him from going too far. When he returned to office in January of this year, things, in my opinion, but not just my opinion, began to change rather dramatically. What we knew as American democracy today is under such a severe challenge in so many different ways that whether we can continue justifiably to call ourselves a democracy is a question that we ought to address. People have already been describing the American government as authoritarian. I personally believe that that is a valid description for what is happening today. Other people have called it a dictatorship. I think that's wrong. If it were, I would not be here talking to you. I'd be shut down. But we are definitely in an unusual state where everything is dependent upon the ups and downs of one man, a 79-year-old former television star, former real estate agent, former real estate builder, big time, and a man who had a gift for always being up front, in the middle of the press, a front page figure,
Mhm.
but not in a serious news way, but in a personality way. Um, he was married to three different women along the way.
Mhm.
And at this time, what he is doing is seeking to concentrate power in the executive branch of government over the other two supposedly co-equal branches of government. And to back up just a bit, the whole idea of America's founding fathers was you had three competing, balancing systems of power, concentrations of power. No one was allowed to be superior to any of the other two. And at the time of the American Revolution, nobody wanted another king. There'll be a march on that theme this Saturday. But back then and central to American democracy is that we don't have a king. We have a popular rule, people ruled, a democracy ruled by the people. That has fundamentally changed in the last 9 months. And because the United States is in the process of shifting radically to the right politically, that has an impact on how people all over the world see us and respond to what it is that we are doing. I think that is a central point that must be borne in mind when you consider the Middle East, Europe, Africa, Asia, whatever the issue is. The presence of the United States is very large, particularly when there's a president who considers everything that he is doing to be paramount to the interests of what other people consider of interest to them. The 2 points I'd like to discuss based on that central point is one, the Middle East, and then, of course, Ukraine. In the Middle East, on Monday of this week, we were all led to believe, if we listened to President Trump, that there was the beginning of a new era in Middle Eastern history, such that we had never seen, he said, in 3,000 years of history. Now, Trump does have a way of exaggerating almost everything that he says. So from the 3,000, the Secretary of State, Rubio, balanced it, and he said, it's the most incredible day in the last 50 days. I could argue with that too. But there's no question that Trump played a major role in bringing the fighting to an end up to this point. Now, there's been only 3 days that have passed since Monday. Monday was a day of the highest expectation. And right now, it is extremely difficult to share that kind of enthusiasm. The headline in this morning's Washington Post, Hamas reasserts control in Gaza. Well, if Hamas is reasserting control in Gaza, that would suggest to me, obviously, that the Israelis are not going to like it. And the possibility of renewed fighting between the two is real today as it was a week ago. President Trump said yesterday that if Hamas does not deliver the remains of other Israelis held hostage, I say remains, we're not talking about live people, dead people, and there were supposed to have been 28 remains. They delivered, I believe, up to this point, 10. There are 18 still out there, and the Israelis are demanding them back according to the terms of their agreement with Hamas and their agreement with Trump. Trump says Trump, is going to make sure that the Hamas people deliver on their word and deliver these remains. A reporter asked, how are you going to do that? He brushed that aside and said, I will take care of it. He personalizes almost everything. Well, I mean, that's wonderful, exaggerated rhetoric, but it has very little to do with reality. We are still at a time of immediately trying to figure out what to do in Gaza, setting up a multinational peacekeeping force, setting up a government of some sort that will run Gaza, and then looking toward the broader long distance question as the fundamental question. Can we get a political deal between Israel and the Palestinians so that the two groups can live together, not in warfare, but in cooperation? And I've covered that part of the world for many years. And it may sound crazy. I truly believe that these two people are made for each other to get along. They're both entrepreneurial. They both feel very strongly about family. They're both hardworking. They're both smart. And they ought to be able to pull it off if they can be brought together intelligently. That's one point I wanted to make. Stepping aside now and picking up Ukraine. I said at the beginning that President Zelensky will be here tomorrow. It is a very important meeting that he's going to have with President Trump, because Trump has indicated in his way that he may be willing to provide Ukraine with the Jupiter missile,
And the Tomahawk,
the Tomahawk missile,
yeah,
which has a range of 1,500 miles, which means that if the Ukrainians had this weapon, they'd be able to hit most of Western Russia. That would include Moscow, and that would include as well St. Petersburg. So it would be a huge decision on his part. But Trump, ever since he has come back into office on the issue of Ukraine, has been up and down and remarkably unreliable. When he came into office and during his campaign, he said in that rather pompous way that he has, that he's going to resolve this problem within a day, within 24 hours. He said he was going to take care of it. Any of us who knew about Ukraine, knew about Russia, knew anything about contemporary European history, knew that that's an absurd comment. However, he's president of the United States. He can do, if he wished, remarkable things. He could have immediately provided significant more military and financial assistance to Ukraine, but he did not. He went the other way. And his own people began to say to the Russians up front, without even a negotiation to proceed, a concession of this magnitude, that you, Mr. Putin, can keep in a negotiated end to this war the 20% of eastern Ukraine that you currently hold, in addition, Crimea, which you took in 2014, you can essentially have all of that. That was the beginning, the opening concession that he made prior to the start of negotiation. It took a while before they actually, Trump and Putin, began to talk to each other. But Trump conveyed the impression that he and Putin were great friends, and that all that was required, perhaps only in Trump's mind, was that he had to sit down with Putin and the whole thing will be resolved. How foolish of an American president to believe that. Because it indicated to me and many other people that he knew nothing about Putin and very little about very little about Russian history. They finally did meet, the two of them, at a summit. The Russians, I think, played it brilliantly. I hate to say that, but I believe it. The Americans played it, in other words, Trump played it very foolishly. I have to, at this point, put in a little parenthesis. In major negotiations, ever since Trump came back to office, The United States does not any longer have a backup diplomatic and intelligence operation such as we had up to this point. A lot of people have been fired in both of those fields. The State Department has been hollowed out. The American intelligence operation has been weakened considerably. Everything has been vested in Trump because that's the way he wants it. And he has reestablished the American political system so that of the two major political parties, the Republican Party will do whatever Trump wants. He has total control of the Senate and the House. The Democratic Party has been weakened as a result of the election last November. They are internally torn apart in 18 different directions. So the Democratic Party at the moment could get better, but at the moment represents a weakened opposition force. So it's Trump and Trump alone that makes big political decisions and major diplomatic military decisions. That meeting in Alaska accomplished nothing except it raised expectations beyond realistic levels. That a deal was just around the corner. It wasn't then, and it isn't now. Trump, in a way, made a fool of himself. Or turn that sentence around, Putin made a fool of Trump by sort of taking him to the cleaners, but never accomplishing anything that Trump wanted and that Ukraine needed and that Russia desired. And so at this particular point, again, because everything rotates around Trump, he got absorbed in the Middle East for the last month, understandably, but he did get absorbed there. And Ukraine was sort of left hanging. Realistically, what did that mean? It meant that on an almost daily basis, Ukraine has been pummeled by a relentless Russian air attack and ground attack, but the ground attack has not done all that much. But the air attack has. Putin has now decided to hit any kind of building that is available. He's making a particular point of hitting energy facilities so that when it gets much colder in Ukraine, which it will, the Ukrainian people will suffer. And it's going to be tough, very tough this year as it was last year and the year before. We have to remember that we are in the early stages of the 4th year of this war between Russia and Ukraine. What can be done at this point? If Trump wishes to make an impact, and he always does, what he can do is provide Ukraine with the missiles that he has been sort of teasing Ukrainians with. That he's going to provide them with by saying that right, Jupiter?
Tomahawk.
1,500
Well,
missiles.
now it's Tomahawks, but it keeps changing.
But the Tomahawk, forgive me,
Yeah.
it's my
No,
it's
but
my
they
memory.
keep every week
But the
there's another
Tomahawk missile. Now, if the president does decide to provide Ukraine with that missile, that could have a really significant impact because it will make vulnerable parts of Western Russia open to Ukrainian attack. The Ukrainians prior to receiving this kind of a missile, have been doing what they can with drones, and they've had remarkable success hitting facilities in Russia that provide fuel. And there are many reports now of Russians lining up for fuel for their cars. And it's not only that, there's a shortage of fuel hitting into the Russian military operation in Ukraine. So the Ukrainians have had on their own, because they're building their own drone weapons, they have had remarkable success. But militarily, they know, in terms of manpower, they know better than anyone that the Russians have a significant advantage. And if they continue to fight head to head, as they have been, over a long period of time, and the Ukrainians do not get the help they need, the Russians eventually come out on top. So that Trump knows that. But does he want to get deeply involved? He has always had this dream that if he could somehow strike a deal with Russia, there are dozens of hotels to be built all over that vast country. And he and his family would make tons of additional money. So there's an economic motivation involved in Trump's thinking. There's also a strategic motivation, I hope. And that is that Putin's Russia not fool itself into believing that it is now one of the great powerhouses of the world. Russia, as an economic judgment on economics, is a backward country. It has large cities which look 21st century. They really do. You go to Moscow today, it's remarkably modern. Go to St. Peter, remarkably modern. But every other part of Russia is backward. I think Putin recognizes that, I don't know, but we in the West ought to be recognizing that. So just to wrap this up before your questions, what is it that can be done right now to help Ukraine? Number one, providing this missile. Number two, lifting restrictions on other American military and intelligence supplies, which this administration has sat on, and Republicans in the House have also sat on. And by the way, the polling data in America indicates that many Americans today who 3 years ago, 2 years ago, were overwhelmingly in favor of Ukraine no longer are. There's a tiredness in America toward the Ukraine war, and a lot of people now want simply to wash their hands of the problem and go away. Trump does not have that ability, I don't think. Although every now and then he says and does things which suggest he could walk away from Ukraine. But every now and then I have a feeling when he suggests that, it's part of his diplomatic strategy to convince people that they've got to do what he says it wants. But those are two things. The West Europeans have to deliver on the promises they have made to buy American,
Yes, it's the season.
American military hardware and supply that hardware to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the three things that must come forth reasonably soon, and I'm talking about within the next several months to a year, to ensure the likelihood that Ukraine can emerge from this fighting with a good chance of surviving as a free, independent country. The final point, one of the fundamental missteps that Putin has made by attacking Ukraine, he took, he was motivated by a strong desire to reacquire what he believed was part of Mother Russia, part of the history of the two countries, the history at least of these two parts of this vast Slavic territory. The effect, however, of his invasion has been to deepen and drive home the desire and determination of the Ukrainian people to emerge from this war as an independent country, cut off from Russia, living its own life. When I say cut off from Russia, that is unrealistic, and I take it back. There will always be close connection between Ukraine and Russia because they share so much, not only in history, but in people, in religion, in background, in literature. They share a great deal. It would be an incredible shame for Ukraine to forget that, and it would be an historical monstrosity for Russia to believe that it could somehow ignore the independence of this large, rich, potentially rich country to its southwest. So those are the 3 points I wanted to make, and I'd be happy to take your questions on that and anything else that you have in mind. It's a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to talk.
Marvin, thank you so much. And your clarity, we're all left with the impression of the extreme clarity of your thoughts, which I remember from your broadcasts some years ago. I read somewhere, you mentioned Ukraine's success in striking Russia. I read, I don't know if this is true, that 50% of the Russian plants that produce electricity have been damaged or destroyed at this point. If so, that's really remarkable. You mentioned things that the West could do, or you mentioned a Trump strategy. We can discuss whether that really is a strategy, but that's a little bit esoteric. Another thing that the West could do is to take the $330 billion held in Belgian and European banks. Ursula von der Leyen has suggested, has implied, I think she wants to do this, but she's encountering resistance from other European countries. What is that would, of course, solve many problems. If Ukraine had that amount of money, they could purchase weapons. They would not need to ask for them. They would purchase them. What do you think are the chances of the 330 billion being loaned, the deal that's been proposed, loaned to Ukraine to be repaid when Russia pays reparations, which we know would be never? What do you think? Do you see any progress on that? I would love to see that happen.
No, what I was told recently by somebody who's involved in that negotiation is they are making real progress. They are moving toward an endpoint, but every time in the past that they've gotten to that time when the major West European countries say, that's it, let's do it, they don't do it because they're afraid that after the war, their finances are going to be jeopardized in the same way that Russia's are right now. They don't want to establish a precedent. So they do not have the courage at this point to take this step forward. They might if Trump says do it. But Trump himself, who was governed so largely by personal economic factors, national economic, financial factors, he has not done that yet. Were he to do that, it would be a big story tomorrow if, as a result of the Trump-Zelensky talks, they have an agreement on the missiles and the money. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Of course, Trump does not control the money. It's mainly almost entirely European. Since World War II, Americans sometimes become impatient with Western Europe because, as you've just said, there's a pattern of inaction while waiting for the United States to rescue them, quote, air quotes. And now that we have a president who's unlikely to do that, I guess there's a question about Western Europe at long last picking up. I don't want to be detrimental. I don't want to say bad things. I mean, Western Europe is a marvelous collection of cultures and countries, but they do have a pattern of resisting action, believing that the United States will do it for them. What are the chances that that could change now that the U.S. is an unreliable partner?
Well, would you just used an important word, unreliable.
I mean, that's me. I'm not, I mean,
No,
that's,
I understand, but
yeah.
it also is an accurate description. My gut feeling is that Trump is going to continue to vamp. He will continue to try somehow or other not to take action that would be perceived as anti-Russian. He, for whatever combination of reasons, I said before about hotels, that's an economic reason. There are America-related reasons. But in the history of the United States and the Russian Empire, we have never been at war with each other. The only time American troops ever set foot in Russia was immediately after the Russian Revolution in 1917, when there was still an idea that maybe the West, different countries, could somehow overthrow the infant communist regime. Well, it didn't happen, as we know. And that was the only time the US was tempted to join other nations in a military move against Russia. Now, Putin can have a kind of dream. And I think that is so much at the heart of our problems today, and make it so difficult to reach an agreement that ends with an acknowledgement by Russia that Ukraine is an independent nation that does not have to live under the control of Russia. And that is that when, and there's some merit in this, in my judgment. If you look back 1,000 years of history, and you look at that piece of territory that today encompasses Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, if you take a look at that piece of land, 1,000 years ago, there was constant struggle between the Turks, the Ottomans in the south moving north, the people from Scandinavia coming south, the Swedes were in constant warfare with the Slavs. And in the middle of it all was this open stretch of territory that today is part of Poland, most of Ukraine, part of countries like Romania and Bulgaria. And borders are constantly, or were constantly shifting. And in all of that history, from about the time of Catherine the Great, the chunk of land called Ukraine was hooked into the Russian Empire. And for a couple of hundred years, Russians develop the belief that that is theirs. And Ukrainian writers who had an opportunity to write in the Ukrainian language wrote in the Russian language because they too felt a cultural kinship with the Slavs up north. So in Putin's mind, this is all saying what? It is saying that not necessarily we own you, but we have a right to a better relationship with you and sort of own you.
Mhm.
And they want the same relationship that Russia today has with the 5 Central Asian former Soviet republics.
Mhm.
Those 5 are independent nations, but they are all hooked in to Russia militarily and economically. That is what Putin wants with Ukraine. In his mind, it's logical that the Ukrainians ought to deliver, but he miscalculated on having stimulated by his invasion a sense of independence in Ukraine that will not be denied.
One anecdote, one question, and then I'm going to put on the screen some of your books, and I'm going to ask people in the group. I'm suspecting there are many questions, and because of your fame and importance and influence, people are timid to ask questions. I want to ask them to put that aside and speak openly. No question or comment is stupid. One thing, Ukrainians are well aware of this. Others on the call may not be. This expression, the Kievan Rus, is sometimes misinterpreted to mean Rus, meaning Russia, when we know that this was an ancient Nordic verb meaning to row a boat, and that the ability of Swedes and other Scandinavians to actually conquer parts of what is now Ukraine had all to do with river navigation, whence the term Kievan Rus. Sometimes people believe that term to imply Russia, but it's not at all the case. One question for me, then I'm going to put some of your book covers on the screen, and I ask everybody, no timidity, no inhibitions, come forward and share with us your thoughts and questions. Marco Rubio, Marvin, shortly after the summit, I saw a session that you gave, and it was kind of funny because you were making very clear the points you've made today, that Trump was outsmarted by Putin in Alaska. I think that's generally accepted as a fact. And then towards the end of that discussion, you said, sort of a head slap, you said, we've been talking about this for 40 minutes and we have not mentioned Marco Rubio, who in a previous administration, the Secretary of State would have been involved in making policy. But it seems that Rubio, either he's completely sidelined. You probably saw the video of when he walked into the C Street entrance that first day. He said all the right things. The State Department employees gave him a very warm welcome. I would say maybe all of them had voted against his boss, but they wanted to get a fresh start, and they wanted to give every opportunity. And Rubio was brilliant that day, and it seemed genuine when he said, I understand there's enormous talent in this building, and I'm so proud. And he said all these nice things, and then he proceeded to destroy the State Department. What do we make of this man?
He is smart and overly ambitious. He has always had a belief that of the entire Hispanic community, he somehow legitimately having arisen from that community could represent it. And given the power of the Hispanic community in America, he could be their person and their president. And so, as we know, he did run 2 times ago for president, didn't make it at all, was humiliated by another candidate named
Yes.
Trump. And when when he was selected to be Secretary of State, earlier, remember, he was thinking he would be selected as vice president on the belief that Trump would need the Hispanic community and that he would bring along Rubio. But in fact, as we know, he went with Vance and gave Rubio the next big assignment, and that was the State Department. Rubio is, at this point, important to Trump because Trump needs a figurehead diplomat, chief diplomat. But Trump is America's Secretary of State. He's the one who does everything representational that has meaning. Sure, Rubio can be in charge of Latin America. Thank you very much. But all of the rest of the world, Trump is in charge of. And I think that Rubio today is an embarrassment. I think he knows it himself. Like most of the senior people around Trump, he is afraid of Trump. He's afraid of the volatile explosions that they see. And he doesn't want to be at the end of Trump's anger, because that would be the end of him.
Yep. Sorry, one more question, then the screen. Public diplomacy. The occasion I just mentioned, you gave a session to the Public Diplomacy Association of America. And some months ago, I saw a marked up copy of the White House budget request. The request, as we know, never is exactly what happens in the Congress at the time of deciding a budget. However, the budget for public diplomacy request was a reduction of 93%. Is public diplomacy dead in America?
No, it isn't dead. It is just represented in a different way. Today, it is represented completely by Trump. In other words, Trump's image is now the image of America around the world. You can like it, hate it, but that is the image. And nobody today thinks about the United States without first taking into account Trump. That has become the largest word and personality in global diplomacy. You can sit back, as I do sometimes, and say, how is this possible? I mean, I've covered many secretaries of state who have not been outspoken, great leaders in themselves, but have always represented the core of American life, the democracy that flourished, past tense, in the United States. But today, the image that it presented all over the world, the idea of public diplomacy has been completely absorbed by Trump. There is no systematic backing of the concept of public diplomacy. It is simply his personality.
I'm going to show on the screen some of Marvin Kalb's books. He's authored 12, 13, 14. I've
18
lost
books.
18. Each one of them a must read. I'm going to put some of the covers on the screen now. I see in our group today many people who are not European. And I want to ask the participants in today's session, especially those who are not from Europe, this notion of the liberal rules-based international order, which seems to be breaking down and which I have heard eloquent spokespersons in the Global South say that this system was made for Europe and America and not for the Global South. I would welcome your comments, people on this call. Meanwhile, let me show you just a few of Marvin Kalb's books. I think that the one that we do want to highlight today, which is the most recent one, A Different Russia. Here's Marvin Kalb a few months ago. Um, and he has absolutely fascinating anecdotes, which are from personal experience of this extremely terrible crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis. But that wasn't the only source of difference and conflict, potential conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States. He was there, folks. He was in Moscow um, the week of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he may want to talk about this book and what he saw and what he experienced that week. Let's not forget, this is a painful topic for me because Marvin wrote this book under the first Trump administration. It was a very effective, incisive book. It was very alarming. And I would say, I don't know what Marvin would say about this. I would say exponentially increased as a source of anxiety. Trump used the expression, often used by Hitler, by the way, that the free press was an enemy of the people. This is a very strong book, which I recommend to everybody. Prior to that, Marvin's, we can call it a section of an autobiography, and the title, Marvin may want to tell you about this. When he met Nikita Khrushchev in the very late 50s, early 60s, Marvin is a very tall person. When Khrushchev met him, he said, "Oh, you're very tall. You must be as tall as Peter the Great." And that became Marvin Kalb's nickname with Nikita Khrushchev, whence the title of this wonderful autobiographical study. Many more, folks. And I'm just, we'll pat, the Kissinger, the national interest, haunting legacy, the road to war. It's kind of unending. Each one of these is a fabulous experience. As you see, much of Marvin's work is focused on Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union in particular. Now, I renew my challenge. Please, those who are, or anybody here, but I think especially people from Kazakhstan, from Kenya, from Nigeria, what are your thoughts when I use the term liberal rules-based international order? Because I'd love to hear how you perceive that and hear Marvin's reaction. And if nothing comes to, I have plenty more questions, folks, but I'd rather hear yours. Should I call in? Should I embarrass somebody, Marvin? Calling them? I think they're in a state of awe to be in your presence. Let me be kind to them and not insist. But again, please come forward with questions and comments. You have an incredible source here. The conviviality of the traveling international press. I remember I was never part of it, but I saw many times. For example, a great moment in my life. I was there when Schultz and Shevardnadze agreed. They initialed this intermediate range nuclear force agreement. It was not ratified, but they initialed it. And I remember that day. It was a rainy, foggy, cold day in Geneva, and the journalists were huddled in front of this little shack where they had been finalizing their discussions. After they rushed for the buses to file their stories, I noticed that they were all sharing information. And I thought, well, isn't that nice? These people, their bosses, are in strong competition with one another. And yet at the working level, they were extremely cooperative and very supportive of one another. Can you comment on that, Marvin? I mean, at the same time, intense competition, but intense cooperation.
No, I'd be happy to, and just living in the world of reality. I've got to leave in about 10 minutes.
Okay. We'll give you, we'll give you 8, we'll give you 10. Yeah, okay.
The answer to your question is I mean, opens the door to so many different visions in my mind of working with journalists now for decades. I have been a journalist and a professor at Harvard now for 70 years. It's an awfully long time. In that period of time, if you're lucky, you pick up friendships. And I'll tell you about one with Ted Koppel, a very famous American journalist.
You co-authored a book or two with him.
Co-authored
Yes.
a book with Ted. I had at one point a very tender lower back condition, which made it very difficult for me to run after the Secretary of State with a portable typewriter, with a collection of microphones for radio and television use. And Ted was younger, stronger, and was able to carry his stuff. And though we were bitter competitors when it came to getting the news out, on a human level, he is the one who used to stop me, pick up my typewriter, pick up my equipment. He would run with both of our stuff, and I would sort of struggle along after. But that was the kind of cooperation that existed among, I hope, good reporters who were also good friends. And it made the larger point to me having to do with not just journalists, but also diplomats and politicians. We can pursue our own interests, but we can pursue them in a human, cooperative manner. Like I said before, Russia and America have never fought each other. There's no reason to even imagine a war between the two, and yet somewhere in Washington and in different parts of the US, they have the equipment and the thought pattern for a global war that would involve the US and Russia. And I'm sure the Russians have the same planning. But think it through. There isn't a fundamental reason to fight. There's enough to go around. And if we recognize that, it would be so much a better place and a better world in which to live.
Thank you. That sounds like a conclusion, but I don't want to let you go before asking you about Paul Nitze and George F. Kennan. We sometimes think of Kennan as a dove. We think of Nitze as a hawk. We're going to talk about this, folks, later in the course. These were the two individuals whose thoughts basically charted the Cold War. Interestingly, though they disagreed on everything, when it came time for Kennan to be replaced in the Bureau of Policy and Planning, he chose Paul Nitze. There was a friendship between these two individuals. They agreed on nothing, and yet they respected one another and turned to each other. I'm guessing that you've met both of them. Do you have recollections, Paul Nitze and George F. Kennan?
The highest regard for both. And you're right, they did not agree one with the other. They were powerfully in disagreement most of the time.
Yeah.
But a concluding thought about Kennan. In one of his final essays, Kennan was looking forward not to US-Russia relations, but to America's future.
Mm-hmm.
And what he wondered about is whether this country would one day, it's an amazing bit of foresight, whether one day, Kennan wrote, the United States will be governed by a person with authoritarian instincts who will think that the United States can do it all on its own, doesn't need cooperation with anybody, and we would run into a horrible period of darkness in this country. And that was his projection at the end of his life about his own country. Now, granted, he spent more time trying to figure out Russia than he did America, but he was a very smart man. And that was his concluding vision of this country. It, again, does not have to be that way. There's so many good things in American history and in the history of so many other countries that, in my naive way, I suppose, want to continue to believe that democracy does not, as the Washington Post says, die in darkness, but democracy can thrive in daylight.
Well, Marvin Kalb, thank you so much. We know that Kennan had doubts about his native country, but his biography by John Lewis Gaddis, Kennan, An American Life. And I think it's no coincidence that Gaddis chose that title, because I think Kennan believed maybe in a fanciful romantic past when America, before his birth, I think he believed in that country. I don't know if it ever existed. He did, I don't know if he predicted, but he's associated with the fall of the Soviet Union. He did say in his long telegram, if America remains true to its values, the rest will take care of itself. That's maybe the brighter side of this very dark prediction you just mentioned. I did not know that he had actually said there could be an authoritarian leader who would lead us away from our true selves. We are in a period of suspense, of potential conflict. And for everybody on the call, I think that many Americans, right, left, and center, all Americans are concerned, are worried. And we're not asking for your sympathy or worry to help us through, but we ask that you understand that the United States is now in a very strange state, very disturbing, I think, to Marvin Kalb, certainly to me. And we hope the best. We've been hearing all our lives this expression, the basic decency of the American people. We will soon find out whether that is true or not. Right, Marvin?
Right.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Marvin.
it.
We thank you so much. We've
Thank you.
gained
Take
a
care.
lot from your wisdom, and thanks for sharing it.
Bye-bye.
If Marvin will depart, he has another appointment. You're getting lots of applause if you see it on the screen.
Well, I'm
if
very
you-
grateful for that. I am indeed, and thank you all so very much. And thank you, Dan, for the invitation.
Okay, Marvin, you're great, and
Take care.
keep the faith. If any, keep it. Yes. Others on the call now. Are you less inhibited without Marvin Kalb? You must have some thoughts or comments. Are there things that he did not discuss that you wish he had done? Anybody? We can go on for a little bit here. I'm very, very happy that we all got to share this man's thoughts. As you know, he's 95 years old, and his experience, his memory is stunning. It's 10 times better than mine. And the experiences, there's so much more he could have told us about what it was like to live in the Soviet Union at a time when there was some hope of reconciliation. His new book, by the way, which we did not discuss, describes a contrast of the Soviet Union during the Cold War. We did not like it. We did not think it was good for its own country or for the rest of the world. However, it was a predictable entity, and there were many, many negotiations going on all the time. The Soviet Union, like any country, would want to cheat after signing a treaty saying, well, we'll limit our missile production, for example. They always wanted to cheat. However, the written word in the Soviet Union had great meaning. When a Soviet leader signed a treaty, it meant something. And the point of Marvin's book, I believe, is that the current Russian Federation is starkly different. It does no longer accept international rules, take seriously negotiations with other partners, take seriously its own promises. Vladimir Putin has promised many times things that the day before the full-scale invasion, his spokesman said, invasion? Absurd. It would be absurd for such a thing to happen. And less than 24 hours later, there was an invasion. Marvin's latest book is a very rich source. You may want to try to have a look at it in contrasting a Soviet Union, which we did not like, but it was predictable and it believed in rules and in accommodating other entity in coexisting. This seems to be lost in Putin's Russian Federation. And Marvin's books are painful. They're insightful, and I recommend all of them highly. I think particularly the first three, A Different Russia, The Enemy of the People, and When I Was Peter the Great, which is more of a lighthearted thing. He has anecdotes about his rather friendly interactions with Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev rather liked Marvin. He gave him a nickname. He was always happy to see him. That's more of a happy story. The other two books are very stark and very important, and we need to learn from those two. An Enemy of the People, a phrase used by Adolf Hitler, which was used very openly by Donald Trump in his first administration, and A Different Russia, which is a fascinating thing. It's he tries not to be judgmental where possible, but he points out how the Soviet Union, Russian Federation, very, very different, largely because of personality. I think we'll say goodbye for today. On Monday, Jack Zetkulik will give us a brief rundown. I say brief because it's his lecture could go for days on the history of U.S. diplomacy. It's actually a history of the United States. And we are America-centric in this course, not because we think America has all the answers or because America has always done good things. No, but because America, number one, is important in the world. It has great clout. Everybody in the world has an opinion about America. And secondly, it's what Jack and I know most about because our careers have been within the US system. So if it's useful, great. If it's adaptable, even better. And in any case, that's an explanation of why we will probably be talking about the United States more than other regions. That said, please come in at any time. And parting last note, we do have 6 individuals who would like to do another simulation, and I believe we're going to do that on the Suez Crisis of 1956. We have 6. We will do it on a Wednesday, I think the second Wednesday of November. If anybody else wants to join in, you're very welcome. You're not obliged. We've got we have 6 people for 6 delegations. If you'd like to join just for fun and professional development, you're very welcome. Just send me a note. And I think we'll say goodbye for today. See you Monday with Jack Zetkulik. And if I'm not mistaken, another major event in this course. Yeah, on Thursday, David Kramer. I'll tell more about David Kramer. He was a human rights advocate. He was an assistant secretary for the bureau that monitors human rights. He's now the director of the Bush Library in Texas. and a very enlightened person, and very much an advocate of human rights. Thank you, thank you. I applaud you. I applaud you. We've just had a great moment in history with a 95-year-old man. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.